Do you think if Kevin Samuels never got on YouTube, Instagram, or the like, that the dating atmosphere would be different? Why or why not? Let's talk. Do you think?
I think that's a really interesting question, but I I think it's really simple. Yeah, it would be different. It would be probably a few years in the past, right? What Kevin Samuels like that effect was more like gasoline on a fire. It wasn't like these conversations weren't being had. They just weren't in the main in the large space in your living room, right? Um, every night, or it wasn't being repeated in every other conversation. These things were happening. They were absolutely happening. The world just wasn't privy to it. It was like the Fight Club. Right? Men always gathered and had their conversations and repeated their experiences to one another and found solace in one another. Just because it didn't look like the way it does today, or it doesn't look like the way women often envision communication to, it's kind of shunned and put down as saying men aren't communicative. But we are. We just do it in our own way. That's it. But Kevin Samuels definitely had a profound effect in teaching us about different terms, or rather coining different terms and putting it into the forefront, like high value man. It's not something he coined, but something that he put forward into the common consciousness. So for something like that, yeah, definitely a titan in the space of changing that. But before we continue, guys, you know, guys, like, comment, subscribe. Really trying to get this channel to grow. Every bit of like, every bit of every other subscription, it all helps. It all helps. But to continue what she was saying, I think one of the things that he helped sort of culminate and coalesce an ideal, an idea that high value, and that became. I mean, people still say it today, and they still bastardize it like a game of telephone. High value wasn't something that men simply dawned and said, "This is what I am." Women determined what a man's value was. They said it in what they said they were willing to accept or would not settle for. He had to make, he had to be a high earner. Okay. What was that? And then they put a number to that. Not necessarily women put a number to that, society put a number to that. And said this amount of money denotes you separating yourself from the pack. It allows you to have a life of leisure. And that number was six figures, sometimes in the 80s. That number just carried over. He would often say six figures in a city like Dallas, right, where the dollar was 1 to 1 comparatively to San Francisco or New York, right? That makes sense. So high value was a thing that was put forward by women, saying you want a man that high earning, excuse me, high earning was something that put forward by women. They want a man like this. And I think Forbes had coined the term sometimes in the 80s. So that was just something that he took and entered in the common consciousness. So for the 6 feet, six figures, again, high value was determined by women through your actions, through your choice, what you would allow, what you won't allow. What would have been different was how polarizing he was, how he became the focal point for all the vitriol that women felt, where you would literally call in on the show to complain to him. He regularly had smoke sessions where you can call in and discuss whatever issue you had. How he changed the conversation, at least for men. We got to see a lot of our lives played out phone call after phone call. We got to see the things like he called, shaming language. You got to see that front and center when a woman would disagree with what he had to say. What was now the course? Well, now you call his sexuality into question. Now you would say that his mama's black, or any number of things to devalue his own position, his own authoritative position, one in which you kind of already acquiesced to when you called into his show. If it didn't bother you, then you wouldn't have a need to call on. But I think more importantly, he showed what it would look like when you actually wanted help. How much confusion exists between the genders. how much what the expectation is for a man to do versus what he can do in reality. What he didn't really get credit for was the conversations he was having for years before women got involved. For years. He would talk to men and talk to men frankly. The difference was the way he talked to men versus the way he talked to women. He didn't sugarcoat with men. He often was very harsh, very, blunt with men. And men, for the most part, kind of had to say, "Yeah, you got a point. You got a chance to listen and see, wow, we really are dropping the ball in these areas. We're dropping it here, 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 here. These are things that my competitors that I've always been curious about. I get a bit of an insight to see how they're living, what their lifestyles look like, how they move and how they shake. Why sometimes you never really come across them. It's a totally different world. You didn't get to see that until someone brought all that down into one show. You got to see it. You got to see the dangers of how the internet will clip things that you say and run with that as what you're saying. You got to see the dangers of how things are taken out of context and how they can run so rampant. And it's something we still see today. So even to the point where now sometimes there's fact checkers, there's links, there's hey, you need to watch this thing in its entirety in its context. Because anyone that puts themselves out there, puts their voice out there, you're subject to be clipped. You're subject to have how you feel about something completely be obscured the other way. Even on this channel, there's sometimes in the comments when there's people, oh, you said this here and you said this here. You don't have to agree with me. I'm just as happy when you don't agree with me, but I'm even happier when we can actually have a actual cogent back and forth with it. That's something that at least we got to see on his show as well. So yeah, the pushback would never have been as polarized. I think it didn't help the divide, the gender gap, or the gender war. Um, in that respect, was is there a way that his message could have been said smoother? We always like to hope so, but I think men often we've fallen into that same trap of it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Well, I can't sugarcoat things to the point where now you're liable to get diabetes before you get the message that I was kind of trying to convey. So we got to see how futile some of this stuff is, how quickly you'll attack what is being said, how something is being said rather than what it is. I think these are things that help change the common consciousness. And for someone to have that ability today, that's and not be some sort of elected politician or rich billionaire, it's it's incredible. It's truly incredible. Hate him 11, what his impact was is long lasting. It's a legacy. Again, these conversations are being had. Right? There were other channels didn't gain the notoriety because no one was talking, or there wasn't this space. He created a space where women can come in and share their opinion. And we all know, as men, if women are there, more men will show up. More women will then show up. So he created this template that a lot of us today looked and emulate. You've had any number of shows crop up. Even Kendra G, as much as she went back and forth with him on the show, her show's very similar to his. Very similar. She doesn't give nearly as much pushback, but she just took it, flipped it, and put it for, well, woman, this is what you look for, this is what you want. She doesn't really give constructive criticism to them. What you're saying, what you're looking for, yeah, that doesn't exist. It's kind of impossible. He's nowhere near as blunt, but there's a different message. So I think Kevin Samuels accelerated the conversation that we're having, and depending what side of the coin you on, you hate him or you love him or you're indifferent. Either way, you know who he is. I think that says it all, right?